Okay, so the theme for this month's challenge was environments and building an environment. And so the foreground trees being in the foreground are closer to the camera. There's less essentially air between us and the object in the distance. So when we we don't really darken the foreground as we are darkening it in relation to the background. It's the foreground is just doing its thing, being the value that it's supposed to be for the object that it's supposed to represent. In this case, it's just darker bark or tree or leaves, and leaves get to be pretty dark. They're not completely translucent. They're not really glowing, and they're not white. So they get to be pretty dark. Green is a pretty dark guy. He has a lot of blue in him. So it's funny how I personified colors, but I'm just kind of trying to capture the foreground, specifically leaving the background. So anything in the foreground, including the girl. Beautiful story, by the way. My gosh, you guys have to read this one. So gorgeous. And I love how you've kind of just really made it feel like a misty morning. It really feels like you described a misty morning. Beautiful writing. That was a very big component of this homework, is that we were deciding all of the design choices early on with our writing. I want to get you guys in the habit of doing that as much as possible. Okay. Don't want to lose the gesture here. I'm so sorry about that. It takes me forever. So, paste. Now let's see what happens. When we darken the foreground, now let's try to shift it over into blues, so that because it's a darker foreground, it's going to have a darker color. Even if it's not nighttime, we kind of force this darkness. And let's raise the background value. Am I selected? No. Let's raise that background value. Okay, suddenly we have this beautiful separation between foreground and background. And your character here, what happened is that they have a bit too much kind of a washed out value to them. We don't want them to be the main focus of this scene. We kind of just want to make it seem like we're emerging slowly into the background. Another problem you have is that it's daytime, but we don't really have enough saturation to establish that there's enough blue in the sky. So if it's morning, by the way, the story is about characters who wake up in the morning time, really early in the morning, and catch the sunrise as they look upon kind of like this ravine. I'm not sure what Lasso's doing. And, you know, them looking upon the ravine the way they are, and it's sunrise. We should have more of a warm value in the environment, I believe. So let me see if I can just find a good base value and then figure out our position from there. Okay, so we have this background value. I'm going to keep it separate. I am going to darken this environment and shift it over into warmer colors to kind of represent the sunrise, something a little bit more warm. I'm going to cool down and desaturate the water because it's still technically nighttime for anything that's in a cast shadow that hasn't become touched by the sunrise, which is all warmed up. So I'm going to try to find the value for anything here. So always decide in your wash what the cool value is. Cool isn't the dominant wash here, so remember that. It's a sunrise. The dominant wash is warm. So I'm just finding a nice cool value to unify everything, and that'll be the value I choose for this area here. Everything else, however, including the sky, is going to have a shift in color. So it seems like it's sunrise. If you ever watched a sunrise, it's like this beautiful combination of blue and orange. But the environment does look green, so I'm just trying to find this balance back and forth until I find a nice balance. Warmer trees means a yellower green. So I'm throwing this purpley color over anything in the distance for these trees. And that's just making the tree look like it's actually fading off. I mean, sorry, mountain. And then back to the sky value, I'm going to choose where the sun is coming from, which is a yellow-orange. Because if it's a warm environment, the sun just rose or the sun is about to rise, we are going to have a bit of a really, really strong value here. So you see, it's okay to start off with the weird, awkward blue of the sunrise because the sky does turn a little bit blue, but it's important that you have a gradual tone moving into where the sun is actually rising from. So we can throw a little orange there as well, or in between here. And then what I'm going to do is the falls are casting this this kind of like steam moving up or mist. And that's going to give us a nice transition between foreground and background. So after all of this, just balancing color is really all it takes. Because what we have now is a nice value for our foreground. And I'm just going to keep tossing back values, seeing what I like. It's okay if the foreground is entirely one value. I'm raising this a bit high. Going back down here, everything is a step, gradual step back and forth until you find a really, really nice balance. But as long as you know what time of day it is, and as long as you know kind of what the attitude is behind your painting, you know exactly what decision to make each time you jump from layer to layer. And that's how I do it. It's exactly how I do it every time. I'm also going to find a nice cool tone to use on all of the areas that are not yet completely drowned by daylight, still a little bit night, and still a little bit shadow. So half of every mountain gets a little bit of that purple. And in doing this, you know, I'm just going to cast this mountain shadow on here. A little bit like that. And in doing this, I'm reinforcing the light source again, because what are these shadows that I'm casting? Core shadows. So throwing that in the distance. That in the distance. And it's starting to look a little bit like sunrise. After that, I'm going to start thinking about bodies of water. They reveal the light environment. So that means we are reflecting some of this newfound daylight right on top of everything. We're going to keep all this area dark. There's no light here. This is all in shadow. Just a little bit of illumination from the mist moving upward. That means this cast shadow carries on all the way into the side here, creating a nice little canopy. And still, I feel like we could kind of correct levels. There's all kinds of ways that you can levels. So we could get rid of more blue. Oh, it's curves, actually, not levels, not this time. Okay, so we have curves. So get rid of more blue, drag that blue down, and then get rid of the green. Get rid of, actually add some more red. And then what we would do after that is just raise the background value up a little higher. And slowly but surely it starts to look a little bit more like sunrise. And we would want to go back and cool down any foreground value, so that goes above. And I would shift this into more of a blue. So this would be the color. And then we would start from here and shift into purples. Okay, so that would be the wash, and then after this is done, you go back and erase away at everything that needs to remain blue. Okay, so you want a nice cumulative combination between this value and this value, since it's such an awkward sunrise that you wrote. or an awkward sunrise environment. And then, of course, if you do remove one of these, you have to go back and adjust what you're doing with these greens. These greens are a little bit cooler, a little bit like a little bit more organic now. And then in order to have a realistic representation of what the mountains are doing, you do have to throw in a little bit of detail. Oops, see, that one cast a shadow on that one. The mountains are a little bit repetitive. They don't really have kind of their own character. You might want to add some character to them, but I think adding this little bit here is going to help, at least with some surface texture. And I'm just blending away. Cast shadow obviously will be a little bit more blended. And what you want to do with this valley is you want to show it off as kind of like the cutoff point into the background. So each single mountain has, so you need to talk about scale a little bit. So this mountain should be small. This mountain should be smallest. Right now it looks like this mountain being this far away is still on par with the ones in the middle ground. So when you get close to this one must be massive. Actually, I will just merge this down. Okay, so that means what we are doing is shrinking this mountain and then using our morning mist or the morning dew or the time of day or the atmosphere or the weather or the climate to create that variation. Oh, I didn't bring back the sky color back down, but it still works. So that means we are casting a value growing this way from the bottom, borrowing from this value into this, and what we are doing is borrowing from this value into this, and that's how you make that gradual step into the background. You see that? We have step 1, step 2, step 3, and things are always mistier towards the base of the earth, like kind of like the surface of the earth, and get a little bit more clear the further we get. Okay, so if you want to go back and correct some of these tree kind of silhouettes over here, you can do that. Things in this level forward are pretty dark. This mountain up here is pretty dark, so that means I can darken it without kind of fear of losing, oops, the step. Because this one isn't necessarily as dark as the foreground, but definitely cannot share values with these mountains here. And then shifting over into blue. And then whatever part of this mountain is allowed to be visible to the light, we would cast a large cast shadow there. And if there is a cast shadow, this cast shadow travels right across the surface, right along here. Again, same deal. We darken and then shift over into blue. So we're starting to create these beautiful levels of distance, and of course we have to follow up with some smudging. But sometimes you see how we've cheated a little bit. We've allowed some mist in here to show off some of these trees. And this is what I see with a lot of Disney movies. Even when they have a sunny scene, they still keep the foreground dark because that camera that they're using is panning, and a panning camera is a camera that can blur and a camera that can focus. And if a camera focuses, then it will be a little bit darker for the foreground. So we've separated this level from this level. You see how similar your values were? Everything was off in the distance instead of being a little bit closer to the viewer. And then I would just go back and bring that orange back in the sky. Just that warmness in the value. That kind of yellow and blue. I think it's better this way. Okay. I would throw off some more of the mountains in the distance. So normal. And just, oh, that's too much. Just throw off some more mountains. And try to refocus the attention back towards the immediate foliage here. So actually go in and lasso every single tree. Bring the attention back between midground and foreground. The midground shouldn't be the irrelevant factor. The midground should have a bit more detail to it. The background is really what we don't see in detail. So things as they fade into the distance fade in a lot of ways. They stack. One is in front of the other. There's also size. So one tree is smaller than the other. Then there's also trees growing up along the horizon. So this tree is higher along the horizon line than this tree. Okay. And then we've got focal detail and atmospheric fade. So we've got the color of the sky against the mountains in the distance, and no color of any atmosphere in front of the trees here in the immediate foreground. So as soon as you bring back any kind of sharpness towards the middle ground, including shadows, attention is back towards the midground. And these guys in here can just fade off. And the light environment color, you can keep changing, but you cannot keep changing the light environment value. That can't be an awkward, constantly changing color. And I think that's a pretty good kind of way to figure out how you're managing the back and forth of creating and stylizing an environment and maintaining the atmosphere. It's supposed to be something that she didn't regret waking up to. That's how the story goes. And then you save your contrast for when it really matters. So this is the waterfall that she's seeing along with the expanse of the background. And that mist of the morning, as well as the peaking of the sun, all that contrast comes right back. And some of that light or ambient kind of reflection comes back into the foreground. Kind of like peeking through, casting a shadow. Sometimes the falls will reveal kind of where the cast shadow is by not allowing the mist to exist past a certain point. So we bring in the mist with kind of like a fog brush of the falls, and then complete the rest outside. And so that way, you see that? You kind of revealed the cast shadow of the falls. And then erase with a mist brush as well, or erase with a cloud brush. Again, it should be subtle, it shouldn't be that obvious. And again, I'm trying to paint something that she didn't regret waking up to. And if you read the story, she was kind of drudging along. She didn't really want to wake up so early. But she does, and she doesn't regret it. So we're creating a lot of intrigue in the midground, and I think that's the biggest issue with your piece. You didn't have a unifying color. And you didn't have any real point of interest apart from the foreground, which was a problem because you even blended the foreground with the background. And I'm just throwing some more mist upward. Some of that mist, oopsie, I blended. Some of that mist is moving on into the foreground. Another thing for environments is if we select all of these mountains. Okay. And completely flatten them. So, cancel. Okay. So what we're doing is completely flattening and removing the mountains. And this is another way we mess with depth. Flatten and drop into the background. What this did was enlarged our world. It enlarged the environment we were looking at. The mountains do feel far away. And because it's a sunrise, now you have more sky space, let's say, to add in some. I think this yellow is beautiful here. Maybe the blue is a good starting point for us to add the cloud effects of a sunrise. The most beautiful thing about a sunrise is, of course, the clouds. Okay, so we have these nice level depth and a little bit of level problem here that I'm just going to correct and contrast. Okay, as for, the cliff that she found, that she stepped over, I think it should be a little bit more cliff-like. She kind of found this perfect spot to stare at the scene. So what are some of the major changes I made today? If you can list them out. I'm gonna try to capture. more of the background to see if I can throw some more light in there. So you see my lasso is very rough, and that's okay because I'm creating a texture by not selecting everything, and that would just be the rising mist of the waterfall, creating that atmospheric perspective. As you can see, it's not important to select it all. And then we would need some more of these trees, some more branches. So this is pretty much the correction I would add to a lot of these pieces today. Not a lot of students have utilized the foreground to create that intrigue. Yeah, it looks like a classic Disney scene. It looks a little bit more like, because of the darkened layer that we used and the green that we kept in the foreground. You can go back to the cool value, you can do something like that, but definitely try to keep it more atmosphere, try to keep it more towards the mood. And sometimes you can do that by breaking a really, really simple color rule. But it kind of just screamed Disney, like the scenes we'd see in Pocahontas when the character is discovering a new land, or the kind of scenes we'd see in Sleeping Beauty. We're kind of just messing around with colors and seeing what we can get away with. There's so much more you can do with the sky. You can really make the sky color very, very pink. So that would be what we have now. And you can go into the pinks and purples and see what you can layer with the values. Oops. Okay, so I would start with something here. Of course, get the right value color. And then some pink like that. Really, really stylized. Really, really, it just works. It just seems to match the scene. And then I would just keep trying to layer the mountain here in the foreground. Let me shift this back into blue, or the green that just matches here. The mountain here in the foreground can be a little bit darker than the others. So environment is, you can do anything you want as long as you're representing the depth rules, as long as you're stacking objects in the distance and layering them along the horizon line. There's an endless amount of combinations you can do with color to establish a scene. I would bring in some more rock formations here just to show that it's not just one rock that conveniently grew for them, that it's entirely, you know, a rocky scene, and these rocks can help fill in the foreground. Okay. And to make it feel like they just left the forest, I would throw some more foliage here to kind of just take over the foreground a little bit more, just so that they just left that kind of really oppressive feeling of like a really, really full forest, kind of like an enchanted forest that's just a bit too dark for them. And they just escaped and saw that beautiful light. And if you want to go for a pure white background, go for it. If that's what you feel like you need to establish this kind of really just breath of fresh air, you finally get to breathe and you just left the environment. There are a couple more issues. You can stylize a lot more to solve the issues. For instance, not enough detail in the foreground. You can make these waterfalls completely white. They can just glow on their own. That's kind of your way of making them important again. You can make all of the water just glow on its own, and that'll add even more intrigue. And then of course, you kind of have to darken the background a little bit so it's not taking over, because the white that you are using, you want it to make sense. And the only way the sky can be dark while still have color is that if it's blue. So many endless combinations here. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to cheat, and there's a lot of ways that you can destroy your painting. And the way to destroy your painting is to not respect the fact that the foreground needs to be darker. And objects in the distance need to be lighter. You need to have some kind of establishing value. Look at how many ways we cheated with color. We used any color we wanted. It didn't matter, because I was trying to stick to the colors you chose as well, that blue sky and the greens. But it didn't work before because you just did not have that contrast you needed for a real depth establishment. And the mountains were a little bit too high. But I've seen landscapes like this where you do have strong mountains like that, and that's okay. So imagine before as the level of detail you're aiming for, and the present version as what you're aiming for the depth. Maybe this mountain could use a touch more contrast as well, now that we've darkened the background. Okay, so just darkening it a touch more. And what you can do is once you're done deciding on the background color, I would completely just get a color layer or a color mode. Where are you? Grab that background color, and that's what you wash over the mountains. For them to really look like they're in the distance, they inherit the value as well as the color of the sky or whatever is the nearby atmosphere. Light environment colors. So sometimes we do have high shine on the highest peaks, and depending on where the sun is. Yep, that's locked. Sometimes we have little peaks like that for the mountains. Just like that, just towards the top. I would be careful not to overdo it. Just towards the tops of the mountains. Just like so. Anywhere where you just have a peak catching the light. But stay focused more on the base of the earth. Stay focused on making it feel like it really is a busy, foliage-filled, rich environment. And that would mean keeping this silhouette full of green. And then there's saturation. Saturation you distribute it based on focal point. So what is your focal point? I'd say focal point comes around here towards the trees, the foreground trees. Anywhere in the midground here. Any cool blue effect or a light effect in the foreground, just look at that. If that's what you want as your focal point, if that's the magical element you want to add. And then if you want stuff in the foreground to be a little bit more saturated, you want her area here to be saturated. I think she's in the shadow of this mountain. There seems to be like this really big mountain here. I'm not sure if I remember that correctly. Okay, but that's what they did with Disney. They got away with a lot as long as they kept true to their focal point. They saturated in the weirdest ways back then, especially because of the way they worked with paint. And this can be any color. Like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to go full Beauty and the Beast here and Sleeping Beauty, and I'm just going to saturate it. And it's still looking fine because essentially I did not break the rules. I'm still following the essential rules behind this piece. And that's if you really want to stylize that much. You don't really have to. And if you want to keep things stylized but realistic, that means you just have to shift the blue to this kind of value. Okay, so this kind of blue, I'm sorry for the mess and the pixels, but that's typically the kind of blue I would expect out of a realism. But if you want to keep it green and interesting, you can also try that. If the scene is a dark scene, if it's an eerie scene, this doesn't seem eerie, but if it's too eerie for you, what you can do is just shift the entire color of the scene over into greens, just like that. Of course, make sure you're not catching the water for the foreground. If it's a little bit too desaturated all around, you can raise the value just like that to add that magical element. There's a far way you can travel before it gets to be too much. If you do raise it, I do recommend making the sky a little bit more, you know, gradient or strong. But what you're saying is that she was happy she woke up, so you really have to make it feel like it was worth it getting up. Let's take a look at this one. This one is about a character that's wandering, very, very scared. You know what I'm going to do with the foreground, but this one has composition problems. So this character is scared, is lost, but they found something after going, you know, enduring the travel. They found something that they were looking for, which is the glow of the gem they had at the top of this peak. So what I'm going to do is put her more into the foreground, flip horizontally, and just turn her into clip art, because I know it shouldn't be completely black, and that's essentially obviously what we're going to be doing. We're going to be detailing, But in the general scheme of things, I'm just going to make you remember it as clip art, because you'll see how dark I really do drop her value. And in order for it to work, she has to drop that dark. All right, so have a look. 1 second, let me just clean this up. And sometimes clip art is just what we have to do, especially on book covers. You guys have done the book cover challenge with me. You do have to make things read right away, and sometimes a simple kind of like clip art level contrast is what we need in order to make that read happen. And that's this. Okay, and you still have a lot of value, but it's not going to be a dangerous amount of value. And again, you can grab that green for the foreground. You can make the foreground value color. You can make it purple if you want it. You can make it pink. As long as what? How do I finish that sentence? You can make it any color. You can mess around with color as much as you want, as long as it is. So this is a little bit more kind of like really stylized game splash. I personally would make it a blue, just to keep things realistic. Okay, and I'm going to skew this around a little bit just so I unlocked, just so it seems like she is on a cliff a little bit better. Cliff is more flat. And you've kind of lost her feminine size and proportion, the correct value. Exactly. As long as you respect the depth. Beautiful answer. Her head did not look like it was looking at that distant mountain. So I'm correcting the head right now so it looks like it's looking in that direction. I'm also going to make it so that she's also a little bit scared, so I'm tensing up the shoulders a touch. And I have to give her feminine neckline. And I'll throw in the hair in a second. Alright, so see how much it did for her feminine neckline here. And if the wind is blowing, it can reveal some of her silhouettes. Okay, show off her curves. And if she has to have that poncho, she'll have it there. A little bit of a flowing, kind of billowing to the fabric. I'm shrinking the legs. You can reveal some of her musculature. Maybe she's in awe, and when someone is in awe, their shoulders kind of drop. And their hands kind of drop, so maybe she has a hand there. But I'll shrink the lower half. Okay. As for her size, this is a pretty good size. It's not perfectly centered. And then you have your wash color, which is really hard to find. It's really hard to see it. She is all the way up there in the distance. She could possibly just, you know, like a Breath of the Wild level atmospheric fade. You could do something like this. Let me patch this up first so you guys can really see the difference. But if your foreground is not darker, you aren't building any kind of key system or legend system to show us what's in the distance and what's in the foreground. And if you're not seeing this in real life, you have a lot of observation to do. If you're not seeing the depth rules in real life, you're not going to paint them. Look for them in real life. Next time you're looking at a mountainscape, look at how much atmospheric fade really is there. And nowadays, now that it's winter, I look around and I see so much atmospheric fade. Things literally turn blue. Trees in the distance, even though the tree, exact same type of tree is right beside me and it's very brown and beige and very pale and grayscale-y, I look in the distance, that same exact tree type is just blue in the distance. You have to start looking out for this stuff. So she just, you know, entered this rocky kind of cliff, and she's using it to kind of find her bearings. Is that right? Is that how you say that? And maybe there's a little twig blowing in the, like a reed or some kind of plant or shrubbery. little bit more here. She's really high, so only like the little, really low-hanging plants that are short. They don't get to grow very high because that wind is too strong. Very short, kind of stout plants grow this high. Maybe a couple of mushrooms. Highland mushroom. Okay. And then what she's looking at over there, and you can do so much more with her gesture, but what she's looking at in the distance, that's where you have to start combining the magical elements. So you create a magical element to combine foreground and background. That's really all you have to do that with. And so she's finally found the thing she needs, and it's in the background. And I'm just going to leave this here as my reference system for what I need to make glow and what I need to saturate. Okay, you have pretty good values here. Now that we're done with this, you can raise her values up a little bit more if you want to, as long as you bring them back down with your detail. So the shadow of the poncho on the legs, the shadow of her body on the leg. You can also ask yourself where the light source is coming from. Is it midday? That has to be taken care of, which means we're going to have a certain kind of gradient in the sky. If it's kind of like a gloomy, overcast day, I don't think she'd be doing much up there. It's very windy. So if you want to, yeah, you could throw in that wind, but I think lightening up the environment a little bit might do you some good. Then you have this twisted, things will look straight in the background for the horizon line. So you have to make it straight out here. Okay. And then building a good reference system for nearby mountains is also really great for establishing. And it doesn't have to be nearby mountains. It can just be hillsides or something like that. But if this was values, you would have, let's say, I'm going to just drop this value here. You would have this mountain as this value. This mountain here as this value. And then you just have those pieces there. And you can drop these guys all the way down. They don't have to be. The lower you drop them, though, the more in the foreground they move. But they don't have to be super close. And if they're far in the distance, you just get them closer and closer to this value. Essentially, this mountain in the distance is way too bright. It's starting to look a lot like a very, very far mountain. So what you would need to do is separate that mountain from anything kind of nearby it. And I would actually throw that mountain off to the side. Maybe shift it over even more this way and shift her this way. That way we're equally distributing elements in the composition a little bit better. That way not everything is lined up along the middle. You got girl, mountain, plane, tree, everything is just lined up in the middle. You got some stuff distributed on either side of the line. So if you create a line this way, create a line this way, there's something occupying here, something occupying here, a little bit here, a little bit here for breathing room, and you're set. But you can't have things occupying either on one line, or one half of the canvas and one half of the canvas, and you're leaving one thing empty. A crisscross kind of checkered distribution of detail is always great. What I would do is just completely throw in a wash for anything in the background. I think that's the best way for us to level out what's happening. This is all the same climate, and if she were really in that kind of setup, I think it would work well for your storytelling as well, because what you're trying to tell us is that with color storytelling is what you're doing. You're trying to tell us that she found a magical artifact, and the only thing similar to it that she could tell was she found the center of the volcano to have a very similar glow in it. And so you're telling a story with color at the moment. So having a nice medium cool wash ready to accept all the turquoise green, really great color language. So merge down And I'm just going to find that green. It's kind of like a turquoise. Really pretty. Kind of feels like a rainy day. And if you want to show that she's in this desolate environment, she can hardly find, you know, she's really scared as you've described in your story. There's a lot that you have to do now to make it scary in your storytelling. You can't have it a sunny afternoon, like up style, Disney style happiness. Your characters can't be happy and your colors can't be happy either. And so for you to reflect that, you have to kind of sacrifice that beautiful sun-kissed day and replace it with some storytelling. So now that green, that glowing green, has a nice bed. You have some white rocks here really throwing off your value, but I like how they look as well. So I might just darken them. I like what they're doing. They're kind of acting like a fog as well, which is really cool. You can throw in a fog. I throw it towards the ground. You know how you've ever seen those mountain shots from a plane? You can see the clouds kind of like water, kind of just moving down over the mountain. You can try some of that. And what I would do is keep the bottom, the base of the mountain light, but keep the top of the mountain dark because it's getting closer to us. Essentially speaking, the mountain is getting closer to us because she is also high. Whereas now the far drop is the distance is also horizontal into the horizon line as well as down below. So we need atmospheric fade for things below. So essentially the top of the mountain is closer to us. And then for the sky, you really have to sharpen that horizon line. There's really no shortcut around it. The sharper it is, the more concrete everything will look, but it not sharp in that it can't be blended off and added with a nice little atmospheric kind of like climate blur in the distance. You can go ahead and add that. If that's a body of water in the distance there, you can add that as well. It's just, now you've noticed there's so much that is lenient. There's a lot of leniency in the way we're building. There's only a number of rules you have to follow. So it shouldn't be difficult to follow these rules considering how much you benefit from them and how little they are. You can count them with the fingers on your hand. They're not crazy difficult to figure out or wrap your head around. And now that you have these nice placeholders here, look at how complete this illustration feels. And then of course you always never paint the sun, but you can paint the effect of the sun. Protect tones. And then I would turn off protect tones and just bring in some of that sunshine. A little bit, just a touch of it. And if you want to have some of it in there, you can. If you don't want it to be sunshine, just like an overcast brightness, you can try just a body of water that just gets brighter towards the reflecting sun. And that would kind of be enough to respond to the light source. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount of light. Okay, so if you guys didn't get your work looked at, please remember that these are all the same issues you guys are dealing with. Balance your colors. Establish your depth. Objects in the foreground are larger. They stack in front of everything. They are sharper. They are darker. Objects in the distance are smaller. They rise up against the horizon line. I'm not sure what this is. I think this is more like mountainsides. Your colors are a little bit off. They don't seem to be balancing even with a wash, and that's okay. But you do have to, you know, figure out what it is that you're trying to represent. Is it a warm environment or is it a cool environment? If it's cool, you have to go back and balance these mountainsides. They have to be a little bit more harmonious. Okay, and then there's that fog we were talking about. This mountain can't stay sharp all the way down there. So you have a little bit of that sunshine. You can even sneak in some of this light right on top of her. She is breaching the mountain shadow, but look, now you can throw in that hair. Now you can throw in some details, maybe a ribbon, some more stuff caught in the wind, just adding that drama, and then just paint that stuff in. So again, to list it, what are we doing with our canvases? How are we making sure all of this is working? How are we being more careful? Her hand is kind of like outside of the cape. And I just want to make a better pattern here. Okay, maybe she's got a little weapon or something. Maybe her other hand is here. Maybe she's got a weapon right there. Okay, maybe she's got a little buddy. You know, she's got a little buddy with her. I'm going to try to make it so that the buddy is cute. Oh, I should have made him look also in the other direction. Flip horizontal. Now he's kind of looking at her. And she's looking at the mountain. And the mountain is glowing with the same glow in the gem. And everything's just coming together. Okay. So one last little glow here. And then we've got... I'm going to choose the sky color. Anyone have an answer to why I'm choosing the sky color for the fog? What is fog essentially? Look at that. That's the mist of the environment around the characters. Kind of just chilling there. And this entire mountain is casting a core shadow on the ground below, so I would kind of try to do that as well. Just a slight core shadow, just like that. Anything to track down the light source. So I want to see these corrections. I want to see cooler, darker values. I want to see dark foreground. I want to see everything. Sky juice. It's not sky juice. That's not an answer. So anyone have an answer for why we are using the sky color for the fog? Okay, so this does feel like she's been lost for a while. It does feel a little bit scary and ominous. I am worried. I am scared. Why is she so high? She's got this gem that's glowing also at the top of the mountain. I'm starving for this story. I need to know what happens in this story. And what you can do is make it a little bit more difficult to see this glow. But yeah, it is kind of like encased in the side of the mountain, so that's okay. We wouldn't have seen it down there, definitely not. So it's working to our advantage. Okay. They're pretty much clouds, exactly. Because it's of water that's reflecting, and water, bodies of water reveal the light environment, and fog is still a body of water. It's still reflecting the light. It wouldn't really have a yellow glow on its own. No, it would have the wash of the environment. And the wash of the environment is decided by the sky and the sun, combined together with the climate and what the clouds are doing up in the sky in combination with all that. Are they casting shadows that are cooler? Are they, are they revealing the light and bringing out the green and everything and the yellow and everything? This could be sunset. This could be daytime. This could be nighttime. It's so many different ways for you to interpret. Obviously, it's not nighttime, but near night, evening time, definitely. Because the droplets suspending in the fog are reflecting the ambient light of the sky. Excellent answer, Tiapar. The same particles of air. It's all made of the same stuffs. Exactly, Katie. Stacking enlarging foreground objects, scaling down background detail, watching color harmony, and introducing atmospheric depth. Contrast and light of the sky reflects in the fog. Beautiful, Tushar. So I want you all to absolutely, this time it's not optional. I do want to see that you guys are attempting these corrections. This is important for the health of your portfolio, to finally learn and put it away, file it away as something you've already learned. The rules of depth. It's really important for environments. You do not have pretty sparkly eyes. You do not have lashes that you can draw. You can't draw lashes on a mountain. You can't, there's nothing to save you from not knowing how to do environments. You can't draw sparkly eyes on a mountain. You can't give a mountain blue hair and anime style hair. You can't, there's no way around it. You have to learn your rules of depth, because there's no detailing essentially in an environment. You can get away with this as a game scene or some kind of establishing shot with some more detail, of course, applied to the mountain. Look at some very basic texture studies to help learn how to add some detail to the mountain, how to add some detail to the trees. But she's very, very far high, so you should not be drawing very big trees. This is a good size for the scale. Everything is pretty thumbnail. It's pretty under-rendered when it comes to environments. The character, even the character is drowned in shadow. So the rules of depth are like very, very important. Raise objects against in the horizon line against each other. Stack objects on top of each other. Shrink objects as they enter the distance. Throw an atmospheric fade over them. Drop their contrast as they go into the distance. Keep contrast high for objects in the foreground. And that beautiful ladder will always control the story you're trying to tell. The story was always good. The story was great. You guys just didn't have an idea for what you were doing with color, what you were doing with atmosphere, and what you were doing with scale. Okay? And add a bunny. I really want to add eyes to my mountains now. Like big, sparkly anime eyes. Beautiful. Rest in peace, my How to Draw Manga Mountains guy. Manga Mountains. That's our new meme here on this channel. So thank you everyone for watching. I will kind of just take a quick look at these. Again, same thing. You have a waterfall. You have some light environment in the back. You have a bit of a valley. There's not much sun coming in. There's no cast shadow environment. So what you can do now is drop the entire valley into a really beautiful serene blue and give this waterfall some color to it. Give it some glow. I can possibly do this for you right now. I'm going to try. I have 2 minutes essentially till my public class, and they're always pretty good without me being late. They'll wait, right? Okay, so we have this separated. I just don't want to deprive you guys of what I see as the potential for this painting, so I really want to show you what it can do. We're dropping this all the way down, and we're also saturating. Actually, I'm just dropping it down. See how bright it was? It was way too bright. I'm dropping the saturation. And then I'm going to make water traveling back up from that. I didn't read the story, so I'm going to be reading the story in a second. No, I think I did read this one. I'm just not sure if it's blending in with another story. But I'm dropping this character all the way down. And again, I'm going to give them their own little valley. I think you have this big splotch of valley here for no reason at all. It really should be corrected. Oopsie. That is a lot of black you have there. Not sure what for. And it all starts off with this initial value drop and then the color equivalent of it. So I'll just make the color this nice purple. Okay, and so what we have now is a color wash that's needed. So we are selecting this, new layer, choose your environment color. What is it in this valley? What color are we throwing in? So it kind of feels like a serene, sad environment. So I would want to add a color that reinforces that this character feels a little bit lonely, a little bit lost. This seems like a wonderful color wash to throw in. And then what I'm doing now is I'm going to show this mountain as further in the distance. Well, these spots aren't going to make it easy. Merge down. Okay, so we've created this stacking. This object is now in the background. And then what you can do is just make this waterfall just glow out. Kind of just the water has its own glow, and that's where you're bringing in most of your drama. And I find a lot of Pixar movies, DreamWorks, they kind of mess with this whole water glowing effect. Even though the water doesn't glow, the water just seems to have its own majestic kind of force to it. So you're in this valley. I would kind of saturate a little bit. It feels so beautiful when we saturate. I would desaturate the background color because it's not that important for it to be saturated. It's kind of like in the distance. Okay, so look at that instant kind of like value we've created. And if the sunlight is coming in from a distance, then we can go ahead and give the background out here the value it wants. We can drop it as a nighttime scene or whatever, and it's just glowing. Everything's just glowing on its own. But where you have right now is perfect, and that sunshine can come in for a moment and illuminate some of these trees back into their chosen colors. So these trees can get that yellow or you know, that color you intended for them, but you're still working with this really kind of like misty environment. I'm just desaturating a touch. And this is a silhouette, essentially what's happening to this mountainside. It's a silhouette because the sky behind is so bright. So we can darken the top half of the mountain, or this cliff. Just the top. Again, reinvigorate this kind of dark scene with some glowing magical waters. Even if they're not magical, remember that. Even if they're not magical, they can kind of glow in their own way and kind of reflect back on the rocks nearby. Okay, and then you have this character now who is in the foreground. Things are not all more important than the character, and sometimes what I like to do is completely drop everything down a touch, just a touch, so that it's not that important in comparison to the character, who is very, very important. And then of course enlarging the character is never, you never lose kind of when you enlarge the character. If you have to make the scene look really, really huge and it's like a very strong mountain and a very small character, then you can do that. The character is always your referencing for scale. Alright? There's so many different combinations of things you can do to kind of boost the magical level, the magical aspect, but it all goes back to the story, what you were aiming for. This is still daytime. This still looks like daytime to me, especially because of this background value here. Definitely still looks like daytime. All you have to do is decide what you're going to be telling when it comes to color language. Keeping it daytime, what's keeping it daytime is this really nice light blue we're using. Okay, kind of like a little private grotto the character goes to collect their thoughts. This one, you don't have anything in the foreground to establish that they're mountains, and the character is supposed to be entering this cavernous area to speak with some kind of demon or to make a deal. If you really want these to read as mountains and not as cliffs, the character had to be really small. Okay, and then these mountains, either they're so big they take over the canvas, you know, they're massive, and the character's like this super, super tiny foreground thing. Okay, and he's looking at all of this happening in the distance, and this background being, I love the purple sky, by the way. It's so retro. It looks really great. For it to read as a mountain, you have to make it seem like it's so huge that the atmospheric fade is between us and it. And you have to throw some kind of perspective on it. It has to be like a little bit, it has to feel like it's towering. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm kind of like distorting as I go to make it feel like mountains. And then this could be, you know, what we're looking at for the cliffs that he's about to enter. And these cliffs, these little sheer drops, can be a little bit darker the more deep into the cliffs you move. So the more in you, because we're trying to establish that effect. And then the mountains, the higher up into the mountains, the more blue they get. So you can do these, like this is how much you can depend on these rules of depth. It reads so quickly. Now it looks more like an 80s kind of rock band type of album cover type deal. Of course, I wouldn't make it pure black. This is just for reference. What the color I would make it is a combination of the purple and the value I need. This is going to be too light, but I'll take care of it. Okay, so darken and saturate. Okay, and then you can throw as much detail as you want. If the thumbnail placeholder works, if the clip art placeholder works, then, you know, everything is going to work once you start adding detail. But the way you had it before, it just looked like props on a stage. Here, it's a little bit more involvement. It feels like the characters are really all scrunched in and the mountain is high. And it really does look like a far climb, doesn't it? One thing you're missing is that some of the foreground should be stacking in front. Oops, what did I make it? Some of the foreground should be stacking in front of the mountain. We shouldn't be able to see the mountain as if it's been flattened out. All right, so I'll let you guys go. Good luck with all your homework for the next assignment. I will see you guys next month. Thank you all for watching. Bye, guys.